In this inspiring episode, we sit down with Emma J. Bell, best-selling author, award-winning speaker, and renowned resilience expert, to explore the profound journey and insights from her work, 9 Secrets to Thriving. Emma has travelled all over the globe, logging over 35,000 miles, interviewing 50 extraordinary individuals and thrivers who've overcome incredible challenges, from surviving terrorist attacks to adapting to life without limbs. These stories not only form the backbone of her book, but also reveal pivotal resilience strategies that anybody can use, not just to survive, but to thrive. Join us as Emma shares her personal experiences, discusses the power of embracing discomfort, and reveals how simple shifts in thoughts and behaviour can lead to profound growth. Whether you're seeking to enhance your own resilience or inspire it in others, Emma's insights are bound to empower and enlighten. Enjoy. Welcome, Emma. Thank you so much for coming on today. We are delighted to have you.
Oh, it's great to be here, Laura. Lovely to see you.
So let's get straight into the content today. We have known each other for a while and your story absolutely fascinates me. You have travelled over 35,000 miles to interview 50 trauma survivors and people with really high resilience after having really challenging moments in their life. And that was a while ago, and I'm interested, what are the stories that have stayed with you and what moments can you share today?
I'm bound to say, Laura, that all 50 stories have stayed with me. It's my great privilege to spend my life and my work talking about the stories of all of the 50 thrivers. But, and I hope none of the thrivers are going to be watching this, because I am going to pull out one or two special stories that honestly stay in my heart and my mind every single day. And I would start with Kia's share. And if you'll indulge me, I'd love your viewers, your listeners, to just understand a bit about her story. So Kia is about 4'11". She's diminutive. And just to explain how the project worked, I did do online interviews with all of the 50 thrivers before I travelled to meet them in person, to spend hours with them with a film crew and just understand their story and their resilient strategies. But nothing prepared me for actually meeting Kia. So I met this lovely woman in person. Her story is that she was married to Alan and they had a 13-year-old daughter, Naomi, and they were all meant to go to Mumbai on a meditation retreat. But in fact, Kia had to stay at home and look after her mum. Alan and Naomi went off on retreat, and Kia, on the Wednesday of their absence, got a call to say that terrorists had taken over the Oberoi Hotel where they were staying. And Kia told me she fell to her knees and she tried to find out what was happening every single moment, every single day. You can imagine, as a mother, as a wife, she was utterly terrified. And it was around 11 o'clock on the Friday morning that the call came through that both Kia and Naomi had been murdered by the terrorists in the hotel. And nothing prepares you for actually being in the space where that individual who's been through such pain shares that story with you. But of course, I knew before I met her that she satisfied all of our psychological markers of thriving, which is about growing in the face of pain and adversity. It's not just resilience, it's like resilience on steroids. And so I asked her, how had she thrived in the face of such trauma? And she shared one aspect of her story that I want to share now that really stays with me every day. She was at a press conference in the weeks afterwards, and one of the journalists asked her how she could forgive the terrorists who'd murdered her husband and child. And do you know what she said? She said, there's nothing to forgive. These terrorists were bound to do what they were going to do because they've been radicalised by anti-Western sentiment, because of their thinking. Now, my face must have been a picture, because she reached over and she grabbed my hand and she shook it and she said, when you tell my story, do not misunderstand me. Make it clear that if we do not choose the narrative, which is what I was doing, she said, I was choosing the narrative. Because if I didn't choose a narrative of hatred, of revenge, of anger, would have chosen me. And I wanted to honour the stories of my husband and child. So I chose the narrative. And, you know, Laura, every day I think if Kia can choose the narrative in those circumstances, you bet I can choose a much more constructive narrative when I get an email that really challenges me, or someone behaves in a way that upsets me or triggers me. So, I mean, there are probably another 49 stories just like hers, but I wanted to give that story that space, because every moment of every day when we get triggered, we can choose what story we tell ourselves about that situation. And the power in that strategy alone, I mean, one of like 130, 140 in the book is phenomenal, really phenomenal. It's changed my life, I have to say.
Is hugely powerful, and thanks for sharing that story. I think it shows just the importance of having that perspective, and you can determine, you know, how you're going to understand a narrative, which is really hard to do sometimes, but I love that you can choose what that is rather than letting that choose you. You mentioned the 9 markers of thriving. What are some of those markers, and how do you determine those? Is it a scale? How is it that you evaluate those for survivors that you're working with?
So when we were doing the research, what we were looking for very openly, number one was, are there common resilience strategies that these 50 thrivers have been using in their lives, not just to bounce back, but to bounce forward to get to thriving? And so as a researcher, I had to be very open in the interviews and not guide any of the answers, you know, follow all of the good research strategies. But the markers that we were looking at were, when we go through all of the thousands of pages of transcripts of those interviews with the thrivers, were there common resilience strategies that 80% or upwards of the thrivers named in their responses as being pivotal to them being able to bounce forward? And what we found very clearly was that there were 9 things that 80% or upwards of the 50 thrivers were doing, and doing consistently, not just in the face of the trauma, but actually in the face of the smaller challenges that they were facing in the weeks, months, and years after the trauma. And I know, because I was the one that went through the thousands of pages, but these things were popping up. So, I mean, no surprise. Number one, self-care. But self-care in a very fundamental way, that we have morning rituals and that we have daily rituals that allow us and enable us to look after our physical well-being, our mental well-being, and our emotional well-being. And really understanding that until we feel compassion for ourselves, connection to ourselves and with ourselves, in fact, we're unlikely to be able to feel true compassion, empathy for others, and therefore we're not in a place to serve others. So that completely turned 180 my view of self-care, because I thought, actually, I have to do the self-care stuff, because if I don't, I can't fulfill my potential in serving and supporting others. So self-care's, and another one of them was support and having a tribe around you, particularly when you're going through difficult times. And personally, I used that last year to great effect, because I had a tough year last year, and I really put that into practice. Other things like authenticity. You really being yourself, owning yourself, knowing yourself, your values, your North Star, your purpose, and living that every single day, and really detaching from any concerns about what others think of you. One of my favourite quotes of all time is this author, David Foster Wallace, in his book Infinite Jest, says, "You'll be way less concerned with what others think of you when you realise how seldom they do." And that was really borne out in our research, you know, that nobody's thinking about you or talking about you nearly as much as we think they are. So those are 3 of them. Mental resilience, of course, which is what I've just touched on, was another of them. There's a whole chapter on purpose, and there were these new 5 components of purpose that came through my research that I worked with CEOs and leaders on, and also on an individual coaching basis, but also on a group basis, to really understand what purpose is, what are the 5 components, and how do we work through them. And I could go on to name all 9, and I will if you want me to, but that's a starter for 10.
Great. And we can come back to the others later on. And does humour come into resilience and thriving? Is that something I'm always interested in, what kind of role that plays? And maybe that's kind of toned down in some instances as not important, but sometimes I see that as a real thriving strategy. I'm interested if that came out in the research.
What a great question. And in all the years since the book has come out, no one has ever asked me that question, so thank you.
Oh, really?
But I think humour definitely comes within the resilience strategies of support, finding your tribe. So it's important that you have a very carefully selected tribe who provide all sorts of things, one of which is humour and levity. And the ability to see even sometimes dark humour. And I have my tribe, and in fact, we were, as you know, I swim in the North Sea every morning. So we're sitting on the bench before we went into the North Sea this morning. And one of us is facing a very, very challenging time. And we found ourselves laughing wildly, using really dark humour around death to kind of create levity even when things are tough. So definitely humour was one of the factors that came up through that second secret to thriving, as we call it, around support and tribe. And the other aspect that really allows space for humour is the authenticity, really allowing your personality to come forward, because we really connect through authenticity. We connect through our personality. And you often see, and it doesn't matter what age they are. I mean, I've been coaching for 17 years, and I'll see, very senior CEOs still projecting this image, which is a veneer that they sit behind. And so the authenticity can't get through that. Versus, other leaders who are authentic, they're appropriately vulnerable, and they allow their personality to build that connection. And often that is around humour. It's around even laughing, particularly laughing at themselves, I would say, and self-deprecating humour is a real connector. So these things are, in my view, vital to thriving.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so true of leaders, as everybody can see through if you're projecting this very professional kind of image, and actually what people connect with is authenticity, trust, real human beings with human emotion. And I think it's finding the line, of what's appropriate to share that still feels like you without the chaos sometimes, which I think you've spoken about before. So it's trying to find the right message for the right group. So yeah, I like that. And yeah, life's short, so we should have fun. So I'm keen to talk about resilience in young adults, and where do you see there are kind of growth opportunities, and is that actually changing? I feel like there's a lot in media about lower resilience in young adults, and I read someone shared a quote with me recently kind of talking about generational differences, and you could have thought it was written yesterday, but it was an Aristotle quote. So there's part of me that wonders, is this anything new? And is that something you've come up in your work? And if so, how do we support younger generations?
Well, I happen to believe that there's nothing new under the sun. And there are usually historical markers that we can learn from. However, this does come up a lot when I'm working with leaders, because at the moment, if we were to generalize across the leadership population, especially the senior leadership population, we would find that most leaders are Generation X. And Generation X were brought up by baby boomers. And Generation X brought up by baby boomers tend to have a kind of learned resilience, because when they were younger, they were thrown outside to play all day long, and therefore they learned about social interaction, social conflict. They learned about being rejected and having to overcome that. All of those social interactions we have from a young age through to maybe 18, 19, 20 teach us how to navigate the very difficult arena of relationship and social interaction. So we build in particular mental resilience and emotional resilience when we do that. Contrast that to Generation X parents of Generation Y individuals. Generation X, and again, these are generalizations across these generations, but Generation X parents tend to be more of a helicopter style. So they're very protective, and they will go in and fight battles for the Gen Y kids, or have fought battles for the Gen Y kids. And so what the reading that I've done around this, my understanding of it, is that Gen Ys therefore haven't had the same exposure to navigating those difficult areas of social interaction. and also they've grown up with the internet, and so they've their social interaction has looked dramatically different. They've been able to switch off, pull away. However, what they have had is the lack of escape, so the social media aspect, which means that they can't get away. But what we do find generally is that there has been less exposure and therefore less of an opportunity potentially to build that resilience muscle. Now, that is a generalisation because there'll be many Gen Ys. I know Gen Ys who are highly, highly resilient and have got through incredibly hard things. When it's relevant in the workplace, though, is that you see Gen X leaders trying to lead Gen Y team members, and that's a real contrast because they're kind of innate beliefs that we have as Gen X, which is hierarchy is sufficient to breed and earn respect. So because you're my boss, I should respect you. Work comes before leisure. So if I need to stay late, I'll stay late. To name just a few, I was having this conversation yesterday with a CEO actually. Whereas Gen Ys are very much about, no, respect has to be earned. And I actually love that perspective. And also I build boundaries around my work because my life is more important in some ways than my work. And so what we're getting is this tussle at the moment between Gen X leaders and Gen Y team members. Whereas actually my view is that there are really rich things that we can learn from one another, and certainly rich things that Gen Xs can learn from Gen Ys, and they need to adapt because we need to learn about how to motivate and engage Gen Ys and the Gen Zs now coming into the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think diversity of thought in kind of any way that you split that is extremely rich for a company, for the culture, and spending time really understanding each other. Even though you might have different perspectives, there'll be a huge amount of rich information there. What companies do you think are doing it well? I've seen things like reverse mentorship schemes where you've maybe got Gen Zers are coming up and they're doing sort of reverse mentorship for more for older leaders. Is that something that's helpful? Where do you think you can kind of get those wins in a company? Anything kind of tactical you've seen that you think would be helpful to share?
So I mean, the reverse mentorship, I've seen that as well, and I do think that works really well. However, what I would say, first of all, is that there has to, first of all, be a culture which really supports any initiative that's going to come in, and that culture inevitably is set by the leaders. So leaders, first of all, need to demonstrate that they're curious, that they're really listening, that if feedback is given, then they'll be open to that, no matter how triggered they may feel by it in the moment, and that they will act on it. So I think there are these little schemes, but what I would say is, I say little schemes, they work really incredibly well when there's this foundation where leaders just start to have feedback as part of the conversation. You know, that 360 feedback all the time, not once a year, not a consultant coming in and asking for it, but that there is just in an organization that two-way conversation, and that there are regular opportunities within the structure, like weekly or fortnightly your time meetings, where those conversations can take place in a psychologically safe environment. So for me, that's more important than any individual initiative. And that comes from normally now the Gen X leaders who really have to stop and go, hang on, just what you've said, Laura, there's a lot of richness here and I can learn a lot. And I'm really open to that. And I'm going to demonstrate through my words and my actions and my responses how open I am.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, we've used different types of feedback channels. And I'm always so impressed with the stuff that comes in that I think that was a total blind spot. Like I just would never have seen that because of my own makeup and influences and all of the things that make you you, and actually providing those platforms, whether it's through innovation, things that are going well, things that aren't going well, has been really helpful. And like you say, communicating, this is the stuff that's come in, this is the stuff we're doing something about, this is the stuff we actually can't do something about. And I think creating that context, because everybody just gets information funneled in, you know, whatever way they understand it, and setting the scene in the context, I think just deepens that level of understanding. So yeah, completely agree. And if you can build that psychological safety at work, that sense of belonging, yeah, I think that's what really creates a strong foundation. So I agree there. And one thing I'm absolutely fascinated by is grit. I think it's, just a superpower, and, fits with mental resilience, and maybe gets a little bit overlooked in terms of like talent or extreme, genius. And these things won't always sustain. So I think my question is, I see there's real beauty in that mundane, just showing up every day, doing the same thing, coming back after things get difficult. Do you think that is the essence of what grit is, or is it something else? And how can you kind of demonstrate that beauty, and does it just take time to do that?
I love that you've asked this, because this, for me, lies at the heart of mental resilience. It lies at the heart of us being able to show up and grow every single day. What I learned from these amazing 50 thrivers is quite simply that it's not how we react to the big stuff, it's how we react to the little stuff. So when you get an email from a colleague that triggers you, and all you have to do is you see the sender profile in the email, and before you've even read the email, you're like, for God's sake, what now? It's those little things. We could have 100 of those a day. And I mean, one fact we need to be aware of, I think, is our subconscious mind runs half a second faster than our conscious mind. Second fact, that 90% of our thinking as human beings is broadly on repeat day in, day out. Then the autonomic and automatic systems, which are a big part of that, they're useful, because you don't want to look at your trainers and think, how do I tie my shoelaces? You don't want to get up in the morning and go, what happens now? But not 90%. If you're living your life 90% on repeat, then you're not going to thrive. You're not going to change anything materially. And if you put those two facts together, what we know for sure is that we will continue to react in the same way in the face of these little challenges, unless we show up and we're present. Nearly half of our waking lives were lost in thought. We need to change that. We need to show up and be present and allow this beautiful prefrontal cortex that we have, our conscious mind, to start to make more conscious decisions. Now, when I'm talking about grit, I talk about the mental press up. So the mental press up, if you were going to do one press up a day, your deltoid muscles are not going to grow very quickly. If you do 20, yeah, maybe that'll make a difference. But you start doing 40, 50, 60 press ups a day, your deltoid muscles are going to grow. It's the same with your resilience circuitry. Your resilience circuitry is here in your left frontal lobe. And what we can see from research like Sarah Lazarus has done, what we can see from the anecdotal research I have done, is that when you choose a mental press up in the face of those small challenges, I mean small in inverted commas, but those little everyday triggers that happen all day, every day, then your resilience circuitry starts to grow. And this is really important, because your resilience foundation then builds because your muscles got bigger. So fewer things trigger you, or when they do, you come back to being resilient, to thriving much faster. And also you're much more conscious when you do get triggered to pause and say, how can I grow from this? How can I thrive in the face of this? And that's what happens. I'll take a 3-second pause. If I get triggered, I'll breathe in and breathe out. That takes about 3 seconds. I'm going from my sympathetic nervous system back to the calm state of my parasympathetic nervous system, and I'll ask myself, how can I thrive here? And what that's doing is, that's an example of a mental press up, where I know I've been triggered, I'm choosing my response, and I'm going to be more compassionate, more understanding, less triggered, and more in my power when I come to respond to that email. That's grit. Grit is simply building your resilience foundation, doing those conscious mental press ups all day long in the face of the small challenges. And then it stops mattering if 90% of your thinking is on repeat, because the subconscious thinking now has become, how can I thrive here? Much more deliberate, much more conscious. So everything is more productive. You're going to perform better. You're going to be mentally stronger. And for me, grit is the result of these kinds of mental resilience strategies that I talk about all the time, each one of which I'll describe as a mental press-up.
It's extremely helpful, and I remember you telling our team about this maybe 5 years ago, and I still use it today. So I get an email and instantly I'm like, oh, I'm going to respond, I'm going to do this. I think, no, just wait, breathe. And it makes such a difference, 3, 5, 10 seconds compared to your instant response. And I read something recently that kind of even takes it a step further and says, write down how you felt in that moment when you were triggered and all of these emotions that you maybe felt, and then come back and read it 5 days later, and it will probably seem, completely over the top, your response to an email, a message, a situation that objectively will not make a huge impact over 6 months time. So yeah, I think that pause is really simple and really effective. So
can I add to that, Laura, and just say that actually what is happening is we're retraining our brain. We're not just building the circuitry here, because if I were to put a rod through my eye and a rod through my ear, where those two rods intersect, there's a little almond shaped part of my brain called my amygdala, and there's one on the other side. And when we're in the habit of being triggered and getting into that emotional state you've just described, these amygdala are like, fantastic, there's a drama here. Let's come to the party. Let's go into fight or flight. And your amygdala get trained to almost ignite. And what that happens is, if you've read the work of Steve Peters, it's brilliant. He talks about the chimp paradox. I talk about the emotional seat of the brain. And when you talk about the emotions there, that emotional seat of your brain, your amygdala are like, oh my goodness, what's happening? We're at risk. And then your decision-making, your clarity of thinking diminishes. So your prefrontal cortex doesn't work quite as well. Now, when you get used to doing the mental press-ups, what happens is you teach your amygdala to go, it's okay, you can calm down. And so what happens is eventually your amygdala start to go, okay, we're going to react less often. And the result of that is that you just won't react, or when you do, you won't react as acutely. Your emotions won't be so high. So there is a retraining process that these mental press-ups start to create. And so I'm sure what you've learned from not just the breath in and out, but the other strategy of writing down the emotions is that, I don't get triggered nearly as often as I used to. And when I do, I can come back to calmness. And there's a brain science reason for that. I mean, I'm a lawyer and judge converted, so I'm always looking for the evidence. And the evidence is there, and lots of research around how the brain just eventually starts to go, okay, there are new rules here. I don't need to panic quite so much when I get triggered.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it gives you the calmness, which I think is what you radiate. And another thing that helped me, it was from Ray Dalio's book, Principles, which I don't know if this comes just over time, but is, it's another one of these. It's another one of those. So like you said earlier, there's nothing new here. It's just the same situations and challenges and opportunities kind of that are maybe dressed up slightly as something else. And that has really helped me, like, no, we've dealt with this before. We can deal with it again. It looks a little bit different. And I don't know if that comes over time. Like, there is probably an experience that gives you that confidence. But I think that has really helped me maybe frame challenges and situations as well.
Yeah, really powerful.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your some of your personal practices, which you mentioned, which I fully support, embracing personal discomfort, and that is how you grow. But you do take that to a pretty impressive level by swimming every single day in the North Sea. How did that start, and how has that impacted you in ways that maybe you didn't see when you started it?
It started about, I think, 5.5, 6 years ago. And I remember the first time I went in, it was the 4th of December. It was cold. I was in a swimsuit and I stayed in for about a minute, and I was cold for about 2 hours afterwards. And I loved it. From the minute I loved it, because there's something about the experience that sets off your endorphins. And of course, we now know from the research about all the other amazing things. The gifts that it's given me are, I really, really believe that throughout of our life, from maybe whenever we become conscious of our own sense of self and resilience, we're able to make decisions on our own all the way through to, the day before we die. We should be looking to be safe and uncomfortable. That's my mantra. I want to live every day feeling safe and uncomfortable, because if I'm not uncomfortable, I'm not growing. And we can see that anecdotally from our maybe relatives who've retired or they're getting older. They stop doing new things and they start to embrace comfort over discomfort, and guess what? Their confidence shrinks. So for me, the dip in the North Sea every single day, all year round, in a swimsuit, it really encapsulates for me this idea of being safe and uncomfortable. And I always think that no matter what shows up for the rest of the day, it's probably going to be easier than that dip in the North Sea. That lies at the heart of my morning ritual. Morning rituals for me are everything. How you start the day is how you live your life. That's my mantra. How I start every day is how I live every day, how I show up. And so it starts with journaling. Then I do meditation, and I'll either go for a run, and I'll always have run challenges on, or I'll do yoga, quite extreme yoga, handstands, headstands, all of that. And then I'll go for my dip in the sea. And that whole, people watching this might go, she's completely off her rocker. Well, it works for me because the amount of energy and motivation and courage having the right morning rituals for you gives you, well, it propels you through everything, and you get to be much more present in your life and really enjoy things like this joy of talking to you right now. Rather than a client I was coaching yesterday was telling me that as soon as she wakes up, she gets her mobile phone and starts scrolling through Insta. Your morning rituals dictate how you're going to live your day and live your life. If you get up and get your phone and start scrolling through Insta, then you're certainly not living the life you're capable of. Now, I'm not saying don't do Insta. I'm just saying certainly don't. When your brain's all ready to embrace the day, please don't make that the first thing that you do in the morning. Go into a set of wonderful morning routines, and whether that's for 10 minutes or 1 hour, or mine take me about 2 hours because I'm now running 10K. So that I've got to allow, sort of 55 minutes for that. But, just create space for a morning ritual that has you leaping out of your bed because you love it, or you'll grow to love it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of a morning routine as well. And I'm interested, over time, you've cultivated this routine that works for you. And I wonder, do you always feel like doing it? How do you do it when you don't feel like doing it? And does just that routine make it almost automatic over time because you don't always feel like going for your run first thing?
I definitely don't always feel like doing it. The first part of my routine is journaling. So I always love to journal because it really helps me mentally process some challenges, make decisions, set my intention for the day. So I always make that the first thing I do because I know I'll get out of bed, and I'll always do that with a cup of tea because I love that bit. But definitely, do I always feel like going out for a run? Absolutely not. So I often do workshops on how to ritualize habits, and there are kind of 8 secrets on how to ritualize habits. And one of those secrets is that when you have done, in my case, the run, spend at least 12 seconds at the end of the routine, really focusing on how amazing you feel, how wonderful you feel, how great it is, because we have a negativity bias, and in order to create a positive memory, it'll take us 12 times longer to focus on that than it would with the negativity. So what I very mindfully do is, how great do I feel after I've done my yoga routine? That's amazing. I'll take maybe a minute actually to just go, that feels amazing. How's my body compared to when I started? And during the run, because I always run outside, so along the beach or wherever, I'm very conscious of how amazing this is. And I definitely look for the positivity rather than, I run a diesel engine. Runners will know what I mean by that. And that is that it takes me the first mile to get my lungs warmed up. I never focus on that first mile because I wouldn't go running again. But I do focus on the last mile and how great it feels, and the smells and the sights and the sounds. And then when I finish, how fantastic. And that's my anchor to do it again. So when I don't feel like doing it, I just go, well, all I need to do is get dressed. And if I only want to do a mile, I'll only do a mile. and think of how amazing I felt last time. And of course, once you start running, that's it. You keep going. In my case, or I just think I just need to get on my mat. And if I get on my mat and only do 5 minutes of yoga today, that's great. So I promise myself a little chunk, and I give myself permission if I want to pull away from the ritual or the routine, I will do. Of course, I never do, but it gets me on the mat or into my trainers to begin with. So there's a couple of the 8 top tips for ritualizing habits.
Yeah. Those are great tips, and I agree. I think the hardest bit is getting started sometimes, and yeah, I love to run as well. And I always think my first mile is like my legs are like treacle, so I'm always like, this is the treacle mile. It's just slow. It's just ugh, and then you kind of go into turbo mode after that. So yeah, give yourself permission to opt out. But
I'm not sure I've ever reached turbo mode, Laura. You need to tell me what turbo mode feels like.
Probably turbo mode compared to treacle mode is maybe what I'm aiming for. But I feel that difference like physically, and kind of visualize that too. So you touched on something that I want to come back to, which is about being really present in the moment. And I have thought about this a lot recently. There's a new book that's out by Oprah, and it really is, we have so much anxiety about the future. This might happen, or, you get triggered by that email. Well, why? Because you're worried in the future we lose that client, employee, blah, 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 whatever it is. Can you talk a little bit about how you live in the moment? You can control that time, but you also still need to build for the future. So how do you kind of manage those two things together? Any strategies there I'm very interested in?
Well, let me first say that I don't live in the moment all day, every day. There's a great piece of research done by Harvard Medical School, which talks about us as the average human being spending about 65% of our thinking either worrying about stuff that's happened in the past that we can't change, or belly aching about stuff that may or may not happen in the future. So because of our negativity bias, our brain is always looking at risk, real or perceived, and it's about bringing the brain back. And for me, definitely the meditation that I do and have done every morning for the last 17 years has been helpful. But I have to catch myself, and normally if I'm feeling an emotion like anger, frustration, whatever it may be, because I've been triggered, I'll pause and think, what's the story that's causing the emotion? And am I thinking about something I can't control and I can't influence? In which case I need to come back to the present moment because it's safe here. So my brain's making stuff up, worrying about past or fretting about future. And so the way that I do it, and can do it now, is I'll immediately just feel the weight of my body in the chair. At the moment, I'm feeling my feet on the ground. I'm feeling my hands on the desk in front of me. I'll notice the light around me in the room. I'll notice the sounds that I can hear, and I'll take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And then I'm back in the present moment. And that's just like a 20-second reset. So if I get hooked or triggered, that's what I do. It's the kinesthetic weight, it's the visual light, and then it's the auditory, which is what can I hear, and that brings me back to the present moment. And so I'll do those resets whenever I feel or notice that I've been hooked, and I come back. And so we're just constantly in a state of just come back to the present moment. And also things that we do all day, every day, brushing your teeth, doing it mindfully, being in the shower, doing it mindfully, just taking a moment to do these everyday rituals, just having a moment of mindfulness at some point, doing the dishes, whatever it may be. So that's, I find, really helpful because your brain doesn't want to stay in the here and now. But what that does do is it cultivates a real sense of calm. And especially if you're in a meeting that's really important, or you're with a member of staff that's got an issue and you really want to actively listen, then calming yourself and knowing that you don't need to be, I need to have the answer here. You just need to be completely present, wait for your body in the chair, etc., and listen and be of service to that person. And then what happens is your brain, and the part of the brain that's in the gut, just comes up with things, insights that I don't believe are always available to us when we're in busy mind, frenetic mind. To finish off answering your question, you mentioned, how do we deal with the future? Well, I can be absolutely in the present moment and think about an issue that I need to contingency plan for. and that, so I can plan for the future and be here in the present moment. And I want to be here in the present moment when I'm planning for the future, because my brain is calm. It's not hooked and it's not anxious. So I don't see a contradiction between those two things.
Mm-hmm. It's more intentional, maybe when you're thinking about the future, and if you're getting into maybe an emotional state where, as you said, you're fretting about the future, that's not helpful in that moment. And maybe there's bits of it that have kept us alive because, you know, you're forecasting what the next thing could be, and you know, that was a saber-toothed tiger many years ago, whereas now it's an email or a perceived threat. So I think it's you know, and also what are the bits you can control. And I think so much of our stress comes from, we worry about things that we've absolutely no control over. So it's really hard, but, you know, training your brain over time, then I think those small things start to compound and you're more resilient, or you can more easily let go of these things. So I think that's really helpful.
You do mention that when you're thinking about things in the future and you notice maybe an anxiety or frustration, I think if I feel that, I pause and I go, okay, what is it I'm anxious about? Or what am I worried about? What's the worst that can happen here? And really facing right up to the worst that can happen. Okay, let's say that worst did happen. Let's say that member of staff did leave or someone did get ill. What would the risk be to the business, and how can I balance that risk? And I learned this a number of years ago now. Part of my business is always pro bono, and I had the great privilege of coaching someone for 2 years who was diagnosed with terminal bone cancer. And she felt she was a matriarch of her family, and she couldn't lean on her family. She couldn't share her deepest fears with them. And for 2 years, I had the great privilege of spending an hour with her every Friday, coaching her through that journey. And she had a young son, and one of course, the fear was what will happen to her son once she's passed. And this came up obviously a few times, and so we went there. You know, we actually did a visualization through. She's passed away. He's at her funeral. What happens to him beyond that? And the amazing thing, that created a massive breakthrough for her at the time, because she'd faced that fear. She spoke to family members to make sure he was going to be fully cared for. And that allowed her to put it down in a way that then enabled her to say, right, I'm going to create memories for him so that he's got memories of me when I'm not here. And that allowed her to be completely present in those occasions, those memories that she created for him. And again, that's a lesson for me that, well, I happen to think that whatever life throws at me, I'll be able to cope. That's the gift of these 50 thrivers and this wonderful woman, Hazel, that I'm talking about. But that was a real, you know, however bad you think it's going to be, go there. Please go there, visualize it, work out how you're going to deal with it. And then it loses its grip on you and you're able to just enjoy the other aspects.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. And like you say, when we face these things, or if they happen, what I often hear from people who have thrived after these types of situations is, I didn't think I would have dealt with that if it had happened, and then it happened, and I did. So, you know, if you can face into that earlier, you identify, okay, what are the coping strategies and how do I make these moments amazing now so we're stronger than we think, is probably the lesson that I hear from you there. And another thing I've tried to do more recently, kind of on that same topic, is, okay, if the worst happened, this is what we do, but also what do I predict is going to happen? Because all of these things that may happen also may not, but then you can probably logically say, well, what do I actually think will happen? And let's plan for that. And actually, it's usually not as awful as you're saying. And like you say, these stories make lots of our problems kind of inconsequential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I want to touch on the last topic that you've spoken about, and journaling, and how much that has supported you, and and it's fun, something you really enjoy. Can you just talk a little bit about that practice and how that fits in, and the benefits that you've seen from journaling?
So journaling is almost the only time that I pick up a pen and do the longhand writing. Every other time, because I'm a touch typist, so I'll type. But because writing allows my brain to operate faster than I can capture it, and therefore that's really helps me with my processing. So if there's something that I'm worried about, I'll write it out, and that really helps me with seeing it on the page and processing it. There's an acronym, a process that I developed, and I mean, it's not new. Lots of people will do it. There's nothing new under the sun, but I call it my GIFT process, which is an acronym where I'll journal every day about G, gratitude. So what are the 3 or 4 things that happened the day before for which I'm truly grateful? And those could be unexpected conversations. It could be a challenge that I've learned from. Whatever it is, I will write that out. Those 3 or 4 things that I'm really grateful for. A couple of benefits. It allows time for processing and reflection. But when you're living your day, I notice that I think, oh, this is going to make my gratitude journal tomorrow because this is awesome. So it almost allows you to be really present in the moment and think, well, I'm loving this. This is great. Like our conversation now will probably make my gratitude list tomorrow. So that's G. And then I is about my intention. And I set an intention. So I think about what do I have during the course of the day? And so what would be an intention that would be the golden thread that would run through everything that I have? And so my intention might be to savor every moment of the day, or it might be to be completely present, or it might be to serve, or, whatever the intention is. And it generally will be, I mean, there are definite themes for me because I'm a human being that thinks that certain things are important. But setting that intention and then coming back to that intention during the course of the day, especially when I get triggered, is a real anchor. And then we've got F, which is future self. So I do a little visualization where I'll go off, and I've got a guided one on my YouTube channel that I did for members of my course and now, coaching clients and so on. But I'll imagine I'm going off, walking down a path, and I see my future self on a bench. And that future self could be me next week, or it could be me in a year's time, or it could be me in 2 years' time. And the age of my future self will be determined by what are the challenges I'm facing right now. So if I've got a decision that I need to make about something that's happening on Monday, I'm going to go to my future self next Wednesday and say, how did it go? What do I need to know at this side of the event that I maybe haven't thought of? Or if it's something broader in my life, then I might go to my future self 2 years down the line and say, what do I need to know? What are the things I need to focus on? Now, the reason you do that is because we have, as we all know, 2 hemispheres of the brain. They're not strictly left and right, but we call them left and right. And our left, of course, focuses on what we know and what our experience has been. But our right focuses on our imagination. And when we do the future self exercise, we're accessing that right hemisphere. So our thinking is much broader, it's much more imaginative, creative, and so on. And I've been doing it for years, and I definitely get insights that I wouldn't have got without that exercise. So that's F, future self. And then T is simply, what are the 3 things I can do today? So it's my to-do list. What are the 3 things on my to-do list that'll take me to the place I want to be in my life? So these aren't the mundane things you put on your to-do list, but the things that are going to enable me to grow and achieve those goals that are really important to me. And whatever happens, I'm going to get those 3 things done. Might be sending an email, having a conversation. And that has caused me to be really brave. So when I had the concept for the book, I was just like, right, safe and uncomfortable. What are the safe and uncomfortable things I'm going to do today that will allow me to achieve that goal? So you get really audacious when you do that.
Yeah. Love that. Yeah. And you have to just ask for these things. I think just so much comes from asking for the opportunity. Ask the question. Often we don't even ask. So I think it's an extremely helpful way to do journaling. I will try that next. So looking ahead, what is next for you? What are you most excited about in your work, projects? Is there anything you can share that's coming up next today?
So it was interesting. I had a call with my book agent last year because I have a concept for the next book, which will follow the same pattern in the sense it's a research project that will lead to a book. And I ran focus groups on the book idea last year, and the focus groups were really positive and very helpful. And my book agent was super excited, and we were all ready to do the book proposal for the publishers and all of that stuff. And then I paused because what's been happening with the resilience work, Laura, is really interesting. I work quite often with groups of CEOs or key leaders, as you know, and what I'm noticing is that those CEOs and leaders, they want to go deeper. They want to do more work on emotional resilience, on purpose, on really deep work on the mental resilience stuff. And I suddenly, well, I kind of saw, and I love doing that stuff. I mean, I love spending a day and going really deep. And also just relationships, because I'm a mediator, I do a lot of conflict management stuff, understand the dynamics in relationships. So they wanted to go deeper on building close connections. And that really spoke to me and my purpose. And so I spoke to my book agent and said, listen, we're not ready to press go on the next book yet, because actually there's still so much in this book that I want to explore. And I'm getting to do some really amazing deep work with leaders, and the ripple effect of that excites me. So I guess what I'm saying is, that great idea, it will happen at some point, but we've agreed to press pause on it for a year and just see where this work goes, because I'm really loving it and I'm getting more and more and more of it. And that's my bag, to sit in a room with leaders and have real conversations I know are going to shift the dial for all of us, that we're not going to be the same people who leave as we were when we arrived. That's my why right there. And I love talking about the Thriver stories, and I definitely haven't, I feel like I've only just scraped the surface of all of the stuff that came out of the research and is in the book.
Yeah, and you have to follow your authentic self, which sounds like exactly what you're doing just now. So maybe you could just give us the list of the 9 strategies so we have it, because we like the completeness.
So we have the self-care, but in much more broadly than our traditional self-care. We have support in the form of tribe and what that support actually means. We have authenticity. We have mental resilience, or perspective, as it's called in the book, but it's actually mental resilience. Gratitude has a whole chapter all to itself. Forgiveness has a whole chapter all to itself. And I've been on my own forgiveness journey, which has been utterly life-changing. Brilliant stories in that chapter. We have, oh my goodness me, we've got beliefs or faith or spirituality, whatever your anchor is. But this whole idea of being connected with things that are bigger than you. And so the last 2 we have are setting goals, which are meaningful. That chapter is really interesting because it taught me a few things about the way to set goals that I had never thought of before. So those insights were really valuable. And cultivating peace of mind. So whatever practices you have that cultivate peace of mind, do those. And I think I've shared with you my various rituals that definitely do that for me.
Love that. Thank you. And I have one final question I'm always interested in, which is, what is the best low-cost investment you've made in yourself? Say less than £100, something that you've bought that has really impacted your life, whether it's a habit, an item, something like that, that's just had transformative powers.
Honestly, something that costs me absolutely nothing, and that is going in the North Sea every day. If you were to strip away everything else, all my other rituals, that would be the one thing that I would do every single day. Now, if I'm not going to go in without my goggles, because I love doing front crawl and seeing in the summer, seeing all of the little hermit crabs and so on, and in the winter I'm going to invest in a good pair of neoprene gloves and booties, all of which you can get for well under £100. So yeah, just that, Laura, it has been, it remains the best thing that I do every single day, because what comes with it is the tribe of swimmers that come around you, the people with whom you live 5 to 30 minutes every single day. And so you get a really close insight on their lives, and you're literally living and breathing your lives together whilst also enjoying a hug from Mother Nature every morning. It's amazing.
Love that. Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Emma, for sharing all of your wisdom and your insights and your personal experiences. The story of the 50 Thrivers is something that absolutely everybody should read, because I think it is life-changing. So thank you so much for sharing and being so generous with your time today.
I've loved it, Laura. Any chance I get to talk about these amazing thrivers is a privilege for me, and thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Tag Lab. We are super excited to bring you the huge conversations that inspire growth in our digital world. Make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button to be notified as soon as the next episode is out. Thanks for listening.